She was on her knees, hands zip-tied behind her back, mascara streaking down her face while a mall full of people recorded and did nothing. And the cop smirked. Before we continue, hit subscribe, like and comment down below where you are watching. The alarm went off at 5:47 a.m. Zara didn't hit snooze. She never did. Snoozing was a luxury for people whose lives had margins. People who hadn't spent the last 3 years clawing their way back from a grief so heavy it had changed the shape of her spine. She sat up in the dark of her apartment, feet finding the cold hardwood floor, and just breathed for a moment. That was her ritual. Not prayer, not meditation, just breathing. Reminding herself she was still here. The apartment was small but intentional. Every object in it had earned its place. Irene, a bookshelf with dog-eared paperbacks and a single-frame photo. Her at 22, laughing at something off-camera, her father's arm around her shoulder. A small kitchen where she made her coffee too strong, because that's how he'd taught her. A window that faced east and caught the morning light just right, if you positioned yourself at exactly the right angle. Zara was 31, a licensed social worker at a nonprofit that served at-risk youth in the city's most underfunded neighborhoods. She drove a 2017 Honda with a cracked dashboard and a passenger seat permanently reclined from when she'd given a ride to a 6'2" teenager who'd never quite figured out how to adjust it back. She hadn't fixed it either. It made her smile every time she saw it. She was not a woman who asked for trouble. She was, however, a woman who refused to disappear. She got dressed in front of the mirror. Dark jeans, a cream blouse, small gold earrings her mother had given her years ago. She looked at herself the way she'd trained herself to. Not searching for flaws, just checking in. I see you. You're okay. Let's go. Across the city, in a house that smelled like cedar and old books and the faint ghost of pipe tobacco her late husband used to smoke, Judge Miriam Cole was already awake. She had been awake since 4 a.m. She usually was. At 63, Miriam moved through the world with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades earning the right to take up space in rooms that had been built to exclude her. She was the first Black woman appointed to the Superior Court in this district. The newspapers had celebrated it. Her colleagues had tolerated it. And Miriam had simply done the work, case after case, year after year, until her reputation became a thing even her enemies had to respect. She stood at her kitchen window with a mug of chamomile tea, watching the city wake up. She had a full docket today, a sentencing hearing at 9, a motion to suppress at 11. And somewhere between the law and the long silences of her chambers, she carried, as she always did, the quiet worry of a mother. Zara was her youngest, her only daughter, the child who had her father's laugh and her own iron spine and a habit of walking into difficult situations head first because she believed, sometimes stubbornly, that the world could be better than it was. Miriam loved that about her. It also terrified her. She finished her tea, rinsed the mug, and went to dress for court. Zara's Saturday had started with good intentions. She'd promised herself a slow morning after a brutal week. 3 crisis interventions, a court appearance for one of her kids, and a meeting with a school board that had all the empathy of a parking meter. She deserved one Saturday where she walked slowly, bought herself something small, and remembered what it felt like to just be a person. Westgate Mall was busy by 11, the kind of busy that felt almost festive. Families with strollers, teenagers in clusters, the smell of cinnamon pretzels drifting from the food court. Zara had her tote bag over one shoulder and a coffee in her hand. She'd already been to 2 stores. She was doing exactly what she'd set out to do. She was in the middle of the accessories section at a mid-range department store, holding up a pair of earrings to the light, when she felt it, that prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched. She turned. He was already looking at her. Officer Dale Reeves had been working mall security detail for the past 4 months, a side gig that supplemented his income and, more honestly, gave him a place to exercise a kind of authority that his actual precinct was increasingly reluctant to let him use unchecked. He had 3 formal complaints on his record. 2 had been quietly dismissed. One was still under review, a phrase that, in this city, meant it would never be resolved. He was broad-shouldered and pale, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome 20 years ago and had since settled into something harder. He noticed things. That was how he'd describe it to himself. He noticed things. What he meant was he profiled. And what he noticed now was a young black woman in an expensive store, standing alone handling merchandise. He started walking toward her. Zara saw him coming and felt the familiar calculus kick in, the one she'd been running her whole life. Don't react. Don't give him a reason. Stay calm. You've done nothing wrong. She put the earrings back and turned to a rack of necklaces, shoulders relaxed, body language open. Excuse me. His voice was flat, official, already decided. She turned. Yes? Can I see your receipt for that? She blinked. For what? I haven't bought anything. The items in your bag. The tote bag. Her tote bag that she'd walked in with, that had her water bottle and her wallet and a library book she'd been meaning to return. She stared at him for a moment. That single suspended second where every black woman who has ever been in this situation knows exactly what is happening and knows exactly how it will go if she doesn't navigate it perfectly. I came in with this bag, she said carefully. I haven't taken anything. I'm going to need to check it. You don't have the right. Ma'am, don't make this difficult. Ma'am, the word landed like a small slap. I'm not making anything difficult, she said, her voice steady even though her hands had started to tremble. I'm telling you, I came in with my own bag and I haven't shoplifted anything. If you want to speak to a store manager, I'm happy to. He grabbed her arm, not with the practiced professionalism of someone making a necessary arrest, with the casual, contemptuous force of someone who had decided the conversation was over and the outcome was already written. Zara gasped, more from shock than pain. Get your hands off me. You are being detained for suspected theft. I haven't taken anything. People were stopping. Phones were coming out. And Officer Dale Reeves, who had never once been meaningfully held accountable for anything in his professional life, shoved Zara Cole toward the ground with both hands and zip-tied her wrists before she could draw another breath. She was on her knees on the department store floor, her coffee spilled across the tile, her earrings, the ones her mother had given her, scattered beside her. The store was silent except for the sound of someone crying softly somewhere in the back, and Reeves stood over her, breathing hard, looking satisfied. Not one person in that store intervened, but 11 people were recording. Miriam's phone buzzed at 11:43 a.m. She was in her chambers, robe still on, reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, reviewing case notes for an afternoon hearing that had been rescheduled twice already. The chamomile tea she'd made an hour ago sat cold and untouched beside her. She had that habit. Making tea and forgetting it existed the moment work pulled her attention, which it always did. She almost let the call go to voicemail. Something made her pick up. Mom. Just that one word. And Miriam Cole, who had presided over murder trials without flinching, who had sentenced men twice her size without letting her voice waver, who had held herself together through her husband's funeral by sheer force of will, that one word from her daughter's voice cracked something open in her chest. Because Zara didn't sound like herself, she sounded small. Baby, what happened? It wasn't a question. Mothers don't ask questions when they already know the shape of the answer. There was a breath, then another. The sound of a busy echoing space in the background. An announcement over an intercom, the shuffle of feet, someone talking too loud about something that didn't matter. I'm at the mall. Zara's voice was low and controlled in the way that people go low and controlled when they are working very hard not to fall apart in public. A security officer, a cop on detail, he detained me. He said I was stealing. Mom, I wasn't stealing. I walked in with my own bag and he... A pause, a breath that shook slightly at the edges. He put me on the ground. He zip-tied me in the middle of the store. Miriam didn't move. The room felt suddenly very still, the way rooms do when the air pressure changes before a storm. Are you hurt? My wrists and my... Zara stopped, started again. My knees. From the floor. But I'm okay. I'm okay. I just... Another pause, longer this time. I needed to hear your voice. Miriam was already standing. Already reaching for her bag with one hand, the phone pressed to her ear with the other. Her reading glasses went into their case. Her case notes went into her briefcase. Every movement was quiet and deliberate and entirely terrifying in its calmness. Which mall? Westgate. Mom, you don't have to. Which store? The Harmon's on the second level, but Mom, really, I handled it. Zara. Miriam's voice was soft. Just her daughter's name, nothing more. But there was a weight in it that settled the conversation like a hand on a trembling shoulder. I'm coming. She hung up and stood alone in her chambers for exactly 4 seconds. Then she walked out. The mall security office was a beige, fluorescent-lit room behind a door marked Authorized Personnel that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Zara sat in a plastic chair with a paper cup of water she hadn't touched and a female security guard who kept glancing at her with an expression that walked the uncomfortable line between sympathy and helplessness. Her wrists had been cut from the zip ties. Eventually, after she had asked 3 times and a store manager had intervened with visible discomfort. The red marks were still there. She kept her hands in her lap so she wouldn't have to look at them. Officer Reeves was in the corner of the room, one shoulder against the wall, scrolling through his phone, unbothered. The posture of a man who had done this before and expected the same outcome he always got. A little paperwork, an irritated supervisor, and then business as usual. He hadn't apologized. He hadn't explained. He'd asked her once, in a bored voice, if she wanted to file a complaint, in the same tone someone might ask if you wanted the receipt for a transaction you both already knew was meaningless. Zara had looked at him and said quietly, "Yes." He'd shrugged. And the store manager, a young man named Brett who looked like he wanted to dissolve directly into the beige wall behind him, had confirmed and when asked that there was no record of any theft alert. No sensor had been triggered. No employee had flagged anything. The bag check Reeves had demanded had turned up nothing but a water bottle, a wallet, a library book, and a folded grocery list in Zara's handwriting. Reeves had not acknowledged this. He just moved to his corner and picked up his phone. Zara sat and breathed and kept her hands in her lap and thought about her father, the way she always did when she needed to borrow someone else's steadiness. He'd been a quiet man, her father, a high school history teacher who believed, with his whole heart, that the arc of the moral universe bent toward justice, not automatically, not inevitably, but because people like him and people like Zara kept their hands on it and kept bending. Keep your hands on it, baby girl. She was still thinking about his voice when she heard the door open. Miriam Cole did not enter her room. She arrived in it. She was still in her work clothes. Charcoal slacks, a deep burgundy blouse, her reading glasses pushed up into her silver-streaked hair. She had not changed. She had not taken the time. She'd driven straight from the courthouse, and the only concession she'd made to the transition was removing her judge's robe, which was folded neatly over her arm like a flag. She took in the room in one sweep. The fluorescent lights, the beige walls, the store manager pressed into his corner, the female guard who stood a little straighter the moment Miriam walked in, the paper cup Zara hadn't touched, the marks on her daughter's wrists. The marks on her daughter's wrists. Something moved through Miriam's face. It lasted less than a second, a flash of something ancient and devastating, the specific anguish of a black mother seeing her child marked up by the world's indifference. Then it was gone, folded inward, replaced by the same controlled stillness she wore on the bench. She crossed to Zara first, sat beside her, took both of her daughter's hands in hers, turned them over gently, looked at the red lines the zip ties had left. She ran her thumbs along them, slowly, the way she used to press kisses to Zara's scraped knees when she was small. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just held her hands. Zara, who had held herself together for the entire duration of this ordeal through sheer stubborn will, felt her eyes fill. She blinked hard, looked at the ceiling. "I'm okay," she said quietly. "I know you are," Miriam said. "You're always okay. That's not the point." Then she stood, and she turned to look at Officer Dale Reeves for the first time. He'd glanced up from his phone when the door opened. He'd registered Miriam's arrival the way he registered most things, with mild and curious appraisal. Well-dressed woman, probably the mother, probably going to make noise for a while before everything settled back down the way it always did. He gave her the look he gave most people who came in upset, patient, slightly condescending, already bored by an argument that hadn't started yet. "You her mother?" he said. "I am," Miriam said. Her voice was perfectly even. "She's been processed for suspected theft. She can file a complaint if she wants to. But I'm telling you right now, I had reasonable—" "What's your name?" Miriam asked, a beat. "Reeves. Officer Dale Reeves." "Officer Reeves." Miriam let the name sit in the air for a moment. "I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer, because the next several years of your professional life may depend on your answer." Reeves blinked. For the first time, something shifted in his posture. Just slightly. Just enough. "Did you physically force my daughter to the ground in a public retail space without cause? Without a theft alert? Without any employee report? Based solely on your own judgment?" The room was very quiet. Brett, the store manager, had gone the color of old milk. The female security guard was studying the floor with intense focus. Reeves opened his mouth, closed it. The phone in his hand felt suddenly very heavy. "I had reason to believe—" "Did 11 people record it on their phones?" Miriam said, still calm, still even, the way still water is the deepest water. Another silence. Reeves's jaw tightened. "Look, whoever you are—" "My name," Miriam said, and now her voice carried just the faintest edge, the barest signal of the current running beneath the surface, "is Judge Miriam Cole, Superior Court, this district. And my daughter, who you zip-tied to a mall floor for walking into a store with her own bag, is going to be just fine." She paused. "I am not certain the same can be said for you." The color left Dale Reeves's face so quickly and so completely that it was almost remarkable to watch. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. 11 phones. No theft alert. No report. And the woman standing in front of him, the mother he dismissed without a second glance, was a superior court judge. The phone slipped from his hand and clattered on the floor. Nobody moved to pick it up. Zara watched her mother's back, straight as a column, still as a statue, and felt something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not triumph, grief, because it shouldn't have taken this. It shouldn't have required her mother's title, her mother's robe folded over her arm like a flag, her mother's voice in a room for any of this to matter. It should have mattered when Zara said, "I haven't taken anything." It should have mattered when she said, "Get your hands off me." It should have mattered the moment a person was a person and not a profile. But it hadn't, and that truth settled in her chest, quiet and heavy. Hanoi next to everything else she'd spent her life learning to carry. She looked down at her wrists, at the marks, at her mother's thumbprints, still warm on her skin where Miriam had held her hands. "Keep your hands on it, baby girl." She took a breath, and then another. The videos went up before Zara even got home. 11 separate uploads, 11 different angles, 11 phones that had caught everything. The grab, the shove, the zip ties, the floor, the spilled coffee, the scattered earrings. By 3 p.m. Saturday, the longest clip had 40,000 views. By 6 p.m., it had crossed 200,000. By the time Zara was sitting at her kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking, her phone was a relentless, vibrating thing she'd had to turn face down just to breathe. Where the caption on the most shared clip read simply, "This happened today at Westgate Mall. Her name is Zara. She didn't steal anything." The comment section was a war zone and a vigil happening simultaneously. She didn't read it. She already knew what it would say. She'd seen these comment sections before, on other people's videos, about other people's bodies being thrown to the ground in public spaces. She knew the shape of the outrage, and she knew, more painfully, the shape of its shelf life. What she didn't expect was the phone call at 7:42 p.m. from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. Then something, instinct or exhaustion, or the particular recklessness that settles in after a day that's already taken everything it can take, made her pick up. "Is this Zara Cole?" A man's voice, measured, professional. "Who's asking?" "My name is Daniel Ashworth. I'm a civil rights attorney. I saw the video. A pause. All 11 of them. I'd like to talk to you about your options. Daniel Ashworth was not what Zara had expected. She'd agreed to a coffee meeting Sunday morning mostly out of curiosity and partly because her mother had called 3 times Saturday night and she needed something concrete to tell her. Some evidence that she was handling it, that she wasn't just sitting in her apartment letting the world happen to her. He was already at the cafe when she arrived, which she noted. Punctuality was a form of respect. He stood when she walked in, also noted, and waited until she sat before he did. He was around her age, maybe a few years older. Mixed race, she thought. Light brown skin, dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The kind of quietly assembled appearance that suggested someone who'd learned early that rooms judged you before you opened your mouth and had decided to give them as little ammunition as possible. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him with notes already written, which told her he'd done his homework before this meeting, not during it. She respected that. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said you'd seen the videos." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The marks on her wrists had faded to faint pink lines overnight. She'd stared at them in the mirror this morning for longer than she'd meant to. "What made you call me specifically?" "Because you were calm," he said simply. She looked at him. A lot of people, after something like that, they're in shock, or they're furious, or they're performing for whoever's watching. Well, he paused, choosing his words carefully. You were dignified, even on the ground, and that matters for what comes next. It was, she thought, a strange thing to say, and also, somehow, exactly the right thing. "What does come next?" and she asked. "That depends on what you want." He leaned forward slightly. "Officer Reeves has already retained a union attorney. The department issued a statement last night. I'm sure you saw it." She had. Officer Reeves acted in accordance with established protocol for suspected retail theft. The department takes all complaints seriously, and the matter is under internal review. 12 lines of language designed to sound like accountability while producing none. She'd read it twice and then set her phone face down again. "Internal review," she said flatly. "Which means nothing without external pressure," Daniel said. "But you have something most people in your situation don't have." He paused. "You have 11 videos, a clean record, witness statements from 8 bystanders who've already agreed to talk, a store manager who confirmed no theft alert was ever triggered, and a mother who is a superior court judge." Zara was quiet for a moment. "My mother can't be involved in the legal proceedings," she said. "She knows that. I know that. The moment this becomes a case she's anywhere near, they'll use it. They'll say she pulled strings. They'll make it about nepotism and not about what he did." Daniel looked at her steadily. "I know. So her title doesn't protect me, not in court." "No," he agreed. "In court, what protects you is the evidence. And the evidence is overwhelming." Another pause. But outside of court, in the press, in the public conversation, in the political pressure that makes departments actually move, her presence matters. Her voice matters. That's a different battlefield." Zara looked at the window. At the Sunday morning street outside, unhurried and ordinary, people walking dogs and pushing strollers and living their uncomplicated lives. "He's going to fight this," she said. It wasn't a question. "Already is," Daniel confirmed. "His attorney is floating a narrative that you were verbally aggressive, that you resisted, that he had credible reason to believe." "There were 11 cameras," Zara said, her voice quiet and hard. "There were," Daniel said, "and they show what they show. But I want you to be prepared. Because this is going to get loud and it's going to get ugly, and there are going to be people, a lot of people, who will watch those videos and still decide that he was justified. That's the reality of what we're walking into." The cafe was warm and smelled like roasted coffee and someone's cinnamon roll, and outside the window a child was laughing at something her father had said, a big unguarded laugh that rang out into the Sunday morning like a bell. Zara watched them for a moment. Then she turned back to Daniel Ashworth in his yellow legal pad, and his wire-rimmed glasses, and his careful, respectful, already prepared notes. "Tell me what I need to do," she said. What she needed to do, it turned out, was survive the next 2 weeks. The story broke nationally on Monday. By Tuesday, Reeves had given a statement through his union attorney that used the words protocol and reasonable suspicion 11 times between them and managed to never once acknowledge that Zara Cole had done nothing wrong. By Wednesday, a conservative news commentator with 3 million followers had posted a clip of the video with the caption, "Was this really assault or an officer doing his job? You decide." The comments were predictable and vile, and Zara made herself read 50 of them before she closed the app because she believed in knowing what you were actually up against. By Thursday, she'd received her first piece of hate mail, actual mail, paper, in her building's mailbox. She didn't know how anyone had found her address. She stood in the lobby holding the envelope for a long moment. Zara then carried it upstairs and put it in a folder Daniel had told her to keep for documentation purposes. She did not cry. She filed it. She went to work every day. She had 3 active cases with kids who needed her, and she was not going to let Dale Reeves take that from her, too. She sat across from a 15-year-old named Marcus. No, she thought, catching herself with a reflexive, exhausted, almost smile. A 15-year-old named Jerome, who was terrified of being placed in a group home, and she listened to him with her whole self the way she always did. Because he deserved that. Because every one of them deserved that. Because that was the whole point. She came home to an apartment that felt smaller than it used to, and ate dinner standing over her kitchen sink, and stood at her east-facing window in the dark, and talked to her father in the quiet way she'd been doing since she was 24 years old, and he'd been taken from her by a heart attack that the doctors said had been building for years, without any of them knowing. "You'd know what to do with this, Dad," she said to the dark. "You always knew." The moment that nearly broke her came on a Friday. 12 days after the incident, Zara was leaving her office building at 6 p.m. when a woman she didn't recognize fell into step beside her on the sidewalk. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, voice recorder app already open on her phone. "Ms. Cole, just a few questions." "I'm not speaking to press," Zara said, not breaking stride. Daniel had been clear about that. "Not about the case, about your mother." The woman kept pace effortlessly. "Judge Cole has been vocal about criminal justice reform for years. There are people saying this whole thing is orchestrated, that you and your mother staged this to build a case against the department. Would you like to respond to that?" Zara stopped walking. She stood on the sidewalk in the 6 p.m. foot traffic and felt the full, staggering weight of what had just been said land on her. Staged, as if the marks on her wrists had been costume makeup, as if she'd arranged to be thrown to the floor in front of 100 witnesses for political strategy. She looked at the woman, at the phone recorder, at the sharp, watchful eyes. She thought about everything Daniel had told her. Stay calm, don't engage. Every reaction is content, and give them nothing they can use. She thought about Jerome and his fear of the group home, and the way he'd looked at her last Tuesday when she told him she wasn't going anywhere. She thought about her father's arm around her shoulders in that photograph on her bookshelf. She turned away from the recorder and kept walking. She made it 3 blocks before she had to stop in the doorway of a dry cleaner and press her back against the wall and close her eyes and just breathe. Just breathe. Just remember she was still here. Just remind herself that this was the cost of keeping her hands on it. The ugliness, the doubt, the people who would always find a way to make the victim the architect of their own suffering. A hand touched her elbow. She opened her eyes. Daniel was standing beside her. He'd been 3 feet behind her the whole time. She hadn't realized. He'd seen the woman approach. He'd followed at a distance, not intervening, trusting her to handle it, but close enough that she wouldn't be alone on the other side of it. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, close enough that she could feel the steadiness coming off him like body heat. After a moment, she said, "We staged it." "I know, I heard." "How do people—" She stopped, shook her head. "Never mind. I know how. I've always known how." "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know you have." They stood in the dry cleaner doorway for another 30 seconds. The city moved around them, unaware, indifferent, beautiful in its relentless continuation. Then Zara straightened her spine, adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "I'm okay," she said. I know you are," Daniel said. And then, Quietly, without ceremony or announcement, he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair back from her face. A gesture so small it almost didn't happen. So careful it could almost be mistaken for something else entirely. Their eyes met. Neither of them said anything. The city kept moving. That night Zara called her mother. "They're saying we staged it," she said. "I know." Miriam's voice was measured. "I've been briefed." "How are you handling it?" A pause. When Miriam spoke again, something had shifted in her voice. Just slightly, just enough for a daughter to hear it. "Your father used to say that the people who question your right to be angry are usually the ones most threatened by what your anger reveals." Zara was quiet for a moment. "I miss him," she said. "Otter every day," Miriam agreed softly. "Every single day." They stayed on the phone for a while after that, not talking, just breathing together across the distance. A mother and her daughter and the ghost of a man who had loved them both and taught them, without ever quite saying it out loud, that the world's cruelty was real and survivable and worth fighting through. Zara fell asleep with her phone still in her hand. She dreamed about the east window, about morning light coming in at exactly the right angle, about her father laughing at something just off camera. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday. Daniel had prepared her for 3 hours the Monday before, sitting across from her at his office conference table with a legal pad between them and a cold coffee at his elbow that he kept forgetting to drink. He walked her through every question Reeves's attorney would ask, every angle they'd try, every way they would attempt to reframe what had happened, her tone, her body language, her history, her mother's career, into something that justified what Reeves had done. He was thorough and calm, and occasionally, when she answered something particularly well, he'd write something on his legal pad that she couldn't see, and the corner of his mouth would move in a way that wasn't quite a smile but was close enough to feel like one. At 8 p.m., he closed the legal pad and said, "You're ready?" "You don't know that," she said. "I do." He looked at her steadily. "You've been ready since the moment you picked up the phone and called me back." She looked at him across the conference table. The legal pad, the cold coffee, the wire-rimmed glasses. The careful, steady eyes that had been watching out for her for 2 weeks without ever making her feel watched. "Why did you take this case?" and she asked. It was the first time she had asked directly. She'd thought about it. Of course she had. But something had kept her from asking. Some instinct that the answer might be complicated, and she wasn't sure she had room for complicated yet. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He took off his glasses and set them on the table, and without them he looked younger, more exposed. "My sister," he said. Zara went still. 6 years ago. He was looking at the table, his voice even but carefully so. The evenness of someone who has told a story enough times to know exactly where the edges are. Different city, different store, same story. She was 23, graduate student. She was in a bookstore. He paused. The officer who detained her was drunk. That part didn't make the news. She had a panic attack on the floor, and by the time someone thought to help her, she'd been there for 40 minutes. "Was she okay?" Zara asked quietly. "Eventually." He picked up his glasses, put them back on. The gesture felt like putting armor back on. "She doesn't go into stores alone anymore. Not any stores. She does everything online, or she takes her husband. She's 30 now and she's fine. She's built a good life. But she doesn't go into stores alone." He looked up. That part didn't heal. The conference room was quiet around them. Outside, the city made its nighttime sounds. A distant siren, a car horn, the low, continuous hum of a place that never entirely stopped. "I'm sorry," Zara said. She meant it the way you mean things when words are completely inadequate, and you say them anyway, because the inadequacy itself is a kind of honesty. "I became a civil rights attorney because of her," Daniel said. "And I called you because when I watched that video—" He stopped. Something moved through his face, something that wasn't professional, wasn't attorney, wasn't measured or careful or armored. "I saw her, on that floor, and I thought, not again. Not if I can do something." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Not empty. Full. Zara was looking at him with the particular attention She gave things she wanted to remember accurately. The way she'd looked at her father in his last years, committing him to memory without letting herself know that's what she was doing. You should have told me that at the beginning, she said finally. I know. A pause. I was afraid it would make you think I had a personal agenda. You do have a personal agenda, she said. Yeah, the almost smile again. But it's the right one. She told him about her father that night. They'd moved from the conference room to the small kitchen at the back of the office. Daniel had found a box of crackers and some cheese, and a bottle of red wine someone had left in the cabinet after a firm event, and they'd established themselves at the small table there with the kind of unspoken mutual agreement that happens when two people are not ready for a conversation to be over. She told him about the history teacher who'd had his students memorize the Gettysburg Address, not because it was on the curriculum, but because he believed certain words needed to live in your body, not just your memory. About the Saturday mornings when he'd driven her to the library and let her take out more books than she could carry, and never once said a word about the weight of them. About the way he'd laughed, big and unguarded and slightly too loud. The laugh of someone who'd decided joy was worth being conspicuous about. About coming home from a conference in another city to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table with two police officers and understanding, before a single word was spoken, that the shape of her life had permanently changed. I talk to him still, she said. She was looking at her wine glass, turning the stem between her fingers. In my apartment, at the window. I know how that sounds. It sounds like love, Daniel said simply. She looked up. He was watching her the way he'd been watching her since the beginning, with that steady, careful attention that she'd first read as professional and had slowly, without quite deciding to, started reading as something else. My mother talks to him too, she said. She thinks I don't know. But I've heard her, when I've come over early and she doesn't know I'm there yet. She talks to the kitchen like he's standing at the stove. Something in Daniel's expression shifted. They were together a long time? 38 years. Zara set down her wine glass. He used to say she was the only person who'd ever made him feel both completely known and consistently surprised. And he thought that was the whole secret of it, that love was supposed to do both things at once. The kitchen was warm and small around them, the wine half finished between them, the city doing its nighttime thing beyond the window. That's a good definition, Daniel said quietly. It's the only one I've ever believed, she said. Their eyes held for a beat longer than they needed to. Then Zara looked away first, not because she wanted to, but because there are moments you need to approach slowly, from an angle, the way you approach something bright. The deposition happened on Tuesday as scheduled. Reeves's attorney was a man named Garfield who wore expensive suits and spoke in the smooth, rolling cadences of someone who had spent decades making unreasonable things sound inevitable. He asked Zara about her tone, sort of about whether she'd step toward Reeves rather than away from him, about whether she'd used the word don't in a way that could be characterized as threatening. She answered every question in the same quiet, even voice. She did not perform patience. She simply had it, the real kind. The kind built not from temperament, but from years of sitting across from frightened kids and learning that steadiness was the most powerful thing one person could offer another. Daniel sat beside her through all of it. He objected when he needed to, firmly and without theater. When Garfield asked a question that crossed a line, Daniel said objection in a voice like a door closing. Quiet, final, unmistakable. Once, midway through, Garfield asked Zara if she felt her mother's position had given her a sense of entitlement in her interaction with Officer Reeves. The room went very still. Zara looked at Garfield for a long, measured moment. My mother's position, she said carefully, has given me a sense of what accountability looks like when it actually functions. What I felt in that store was not entitlement. It was the recognition that I had done nothing wrong. She paused. Those are different things. I'd think an attorney would know the difference. Garfield's jaw tightened. Daniel wrote something on his legal pad. Later in the elevator after it was over, he turned the legal pad to show her what he'd written at that moment. There she is. Zara read it twice. Then she laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of her, the kind her father would have recognized. It rang out in the small elevator like something that had been waiting a long time to happen. Daniel watched her laugh and looked at her, the way people look at things they are realizing they have been waiting for without knowing they were waiting. It was her mother who said it first. Miriam had come for dinner on Wednesday, Zara's apartment, Zara's cooking, a simple meal that had been their ritual since Zara had moved into this place 3 years ago. They ate at the small table by the east window and talked about the case and about work and about a book Miriam was reading that she kept describing as infuriating but important, which was high praise from a woman who read the way other people breathed. Then clearing the dishes, Miriam said without preamble, "Tell me about the attorney." Zara stopped moving. "Oh, he's good at his job," she said carefully. "Zara, Mom." Miriam set down the plates and turned to look at her daughter with the particular expression that had survived 31 years of Zara's attempts to be opaque. Amused, loving, entirely unconvinced. "I spoke with him on the phone last week," Miriam said. "About the deposition. He called to update me because he knew I was worried, and he didn't want me to hear it secondhand." She paused. "That's a specific kind of thoughtfulness." Zara was quiet. "He's also called you every evening this week," Miriam continued, "to check in. He's my attorney. Attorneys don't call at 9 p.m. to ask if you've eaten dinner." The apartment was very quiet. Outside the east window, the city glittered in the Wednesday dark. "It's complicated," Zara said finally. "Ajha, most things worth having are," Miriam said. She picked up the plates again and moved toward the sink with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has made her point and knows it. "Your father called me 3 times a day for 6 weeks before he finally asked me to dinner. I thought it was a professional call every time." She turned on the faucet. "It was not." Zara leaned against the counter and looked at her mother, at the silver in her hair and the straight line of her back and the hands that had held her wrist so carefully in that beige security office 2 weeks ago. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "Just that. Just the truth, unarmored." Miriam turned off the faucet, turned around, looked at her daughter with everything she was, mother, judge, widow, woman, present in her face at once. "I know," she said. And that's how you know it's real." That night Daniel called at 9:04 p.m. Zara was at her east window, city lights below, father's photograph on the shelf behind her, her mother's words still warm in the air of the apartment. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey," he said. "Did you eat?" She smiled. It started small and grew into something she was glad he couldn't see. Or maybe, she thought, surprising herself, she was glad he couldn't see it yet. "I had dinner with my mother," she said. "She made me feel very seen and slightly ambushed." A pause, then, "Good ambush or bad ambush?" "Good," she said after a moment. "Definitely good." Another pause. The particular kind of pause that is not empty but full of things circling toward the surface, things that are almost ready to be said. "Zara," he said. "I know," she said quietly. A beat. "Okay," he said, and she could hear the something in his voice, the something warm and unguarded and carefully hopeful. "Okay," she said back. They stayed on the phone for another hour after that, talking about nothing important, talking about everything that was. The call came at 6:17 a.m. on a Thursday. Zara was already awake. She'd barely slept, the way you don't sleep the night before something you've been building toward for weeks, when your body understands the weight of what's coming even before your mind has fully articulated it. She was at her east window with her too-strong coffee, watching the city come back to itself in the early gray light. When her phone lit up with Daniel's name, she picked up immediately. "Tell me," she said. A pause. Just long enough to understand that what was coming had shape and weight to it. "Reeves's attorney filed a motion last night," Daniel said. His voice was controlled, but she knew him well enough now to hear what was underneath it. The particular tension of someone managing information they wish they didn't have to deliver. "They're petitioning to have your mother formally investigated for judicial misconduct. They're claiming she used her position to intimidate Reeves in that security office, that her presence constituted undue influence, and that any legal proceedings connected to this case are compromised by her involvement." The coffee mug in Zara's hand went very still. That's... She stopped, started again. She came as my mother. She wasn't there in any judicial capacity. She wasn't wearing a robe. She didn't invoke her title until he... I know, Daniel said. I know all of that, and so does every reasonable legal mind who looks at this. But reasonable isn't the point right now. The point is the motion exists, it's been filed, and it's going to generate press before the sun is fully up. Zara turned from the window. Her apartment, the books, the photograph, the small, carefully assembled life she'd built here, felt suddenly fragile in a way it hadn't before, like a thing that could be picked up and shaken. They're going after her, she said, quietly, flatly. The way you say a thing when you need to hear it out loud to believe it's real. They're going after you through her, Daniel said. It's a pressure tactic. They want you to pull back. They want the case to become about your mother's conduct instead of Reeves's. Yeah, they want me to drop it, Zara said. Yes. The city outside was getting lighter. Somewhere below, she could hear the first garbage truck of the morning, the mechanical groan and clatter of a day beginning whether anyone was ready for it or not. Does my mother know? Her clerk called her at 6. She's already at the courthouse. Of course she was. Miriam's chambers felt different at 7 a.m. Zara had driven there directly, still in the clothes she'd put on at 5:30 without quite deciding to get dressed. Dark jeans, the cream blouse, the gold earrings, the same outfit she'd worn to the mall. She hadn't realized until she caught her reflection in the courthouse bathroom mirror and stood there for a moment looking at herself, understanding without planning it that she'd chosen them on purpose. Some deep part of her insisting on the continuity. This is where it started. This is where it ends. You are the same person all the way through. Miriam was at her desk when Zara came in. Not in her robe, just herself, in a dark gray suit, reading glasses on, a stack of documents in front of her that she was working through with the focused attention of someone who refuses to be ambushed by paperwork, even paperwork designed to ambush her. She looked up when Zara entered. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Miriam took off her glasses and set them down and simply opened her arms. And Zara crossed the room and sat on the edge of her mother's desk and leaned into her the way she hadn't since she was small, fully without reservation, borrowing her mother's steadiness the way she used to borrow her father's. Miriam held her, not one hand on her back, one hand at the back of her head, the way she'd always done. I'm sorry, Zara said into her mother's shoulder. Mom, I'm so sorry. This is because of me. Stop, Miriam said, firmly, gently, the word a door closing on that particular direction of thought. You don't get to apologize for existing. We settled that when you were 4 years old, and some boy at school told you your hair was wrong, and you came home thinking it was something you'd done. She felt Miriam's hand move slowly on her back. This is not something you did. This is something that was done to you. And now they're doing something else to try to make you forget that. We are not going to forget that. Zara pulled back enough to look at her mother's face, at the tiredness around her eyes that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago, at the absolute unbroken dignity of a woman being attacked through her child and refusing with every cell and every year and every case she'd ever fought through, to break. What are you going to do? Zara asked. Miriam looked at her for a long moment, and then she said the thing that Zara hadn't expected, the thing that reordered everything. I'm going to recuse myself from every case connected to this matter. Formally, publicly, voluntarily. Today. Zara stared. Mom, I'm going to issue a statement that makes clear I recuse, not because I did anything improper, but because the appearance of impropriety is being weaponized, and I will not allow this case, your case, to be decided on anything other than the evidence. Her voice was measured and absolute. I will not give them the courtroom. I will give them my recusal. And then I will sit in that gallery as your mother, not your judge, and I will watch the evidence speak for itself. That's, Zara's voice caught, that's a significant thing to give up. It is not giving up, Miriam said. It is choosing which fight matters more. She reached out and touched her daughter's face, just for a moment. Just her palm against Zara's cheek, warm and steady. You matter more. You have always, always mattered more. Daniel filed their counter-response by noon. Zara sat in his office and watched him work and felt something she didn't have a word for. The specific emotion of watching someone fight for you with their whole skill, with everything they know how to do, with the particular ferocity of someone for whom this is not just professional, but personal and true. He filed 12 pages in 4 hours. She read every word. It was, she thought, the most thorough demolition of a bad faith legal argument she'd ever seen. And she'd grown up watching her mother work. When he sent it, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled and rubbed his eyes under his glasses and looked suddenly, briefly, like someone who had been running on purpose and adrenaline for 3 weeks and had just allowed himself to acknowledge it. That's everything we have, and he said. It's enough, she said. He looked at her. You don't know that. No, she agreed. But I believe it. She paused. Is that allowed? Something in his face shifted, the armor down again, the real thing underneath it, visible and unguarded. Yeah, he said quietly. That's allowed. The hearing was set for a Friday morning, 3 weeks after the motion had been filed. Courtroom 7, ninth floor, in a wood-paneled room that smelled like old paper and institutional carpet, and the particular gravity of decisions being made. Zara wore her navy dress, small gold earrings. She sat at the plaintiff's table with Daniel beside her, and her hands flat on the table in front of her. Not folded, not hidden, visible, the faint pink lines on her wrists entirely gone now, but not forgotten. She did not look at Reeves. She'd made that decision deliberately. She would not spend her energy on him. She would look at the judge, a man named Honorable Warren Pierce, who had a reputation for impatience with theatrics and a longer reputation for evidentiary fairness. And she would let the truth do what truth does when it's given enough room. Miriam was in the gallery, third row, dark coat, reading glasses in her hands. Knew her posture, the posture of a woman who has spent decades occupying rooms on the other side of the bar and now sat on this side of it with a grace that cost her something Zara could feel from across the room. Their eyes met once, before things began. Miriam gave her a single nod. Small, certain. Keep your hands on it, baby girl. Garfield went first. He was smooth and prepared and presented the narrative he'd been building for weeks. Reasonable suspicion, protocol, a mother's powerful position casting a shadow over due process. He showed the clip of Miriam in the security office, her voice level and precise, and argued that her words constituted implicit judicial coercion. He was good. Zara had expected him to be good. Then Daniel stood up. He played all 11 videos, not clips. Complete, unedited, full footage, are each one projected in sequence on the courtroom screen. He played them without commentary. He let them run in the particular silence of a room full of people watching something that doesn't require explanation. The store manager testified. He confirmed again in this room, under oath, that no theft alert had been triggered. No employee had reported anything. There had been no basis for the initial approach. 2 bystanders testified. Both described Reeves's demeanor as aggressive from the first moment. One of them, a retired teacher named Helen who was 71 years old and had a voice like gravel and conviction, said, "He walked toward that young woman the way people walk towards something they've already decided, like his mind was made up before he got there." Daniel called a use of force expert. He called a retail security consultant who explained industry standard protocol and noted, point by point, exactly how many of them Reeves had violated. Then Daniel stood before Judge Pierce and said quietly, without theater, "Your Honor, what you have seen today is the evidence. Not a narrative, not a characterization, the evidence. 11 cameras, every angle, and in not one frame does Zara Cole do anything that justifies what was done to her. The motion to attribute impropriety to Judge Cole's presence fails on its own terms. A mother came to find her daughter. That her mother is a judge is a biographical fact, not a legal act. We ask that the court recognize it as such. And we ask that Officer Dale Reeves be held accountable for what every camera in that mall recorded him doing." He sat down. The room was quiet. Judge Pierce looked at the screen, still frozen on the last frame of the last video. Zara on her knees, hands zip-tied, coffee spilled across the tile, earrings scattered. He looked at it for a long time. The ruling took 4 days. Zara went to work. She sat with Jerome, who had gotten good news about his placement and came in that Tuesday practically vibrating with relief. She listened to him talk about the apartment, about the family, about the bedroom with a window that faced a park, and she felt something loosen in her chest. That specific joy that belongs to people who work in service of others and occasionally, just occasionally, get to see it work. She called her mother every evening. They talked about the case and about books and about the slow, quiet approach of spring, the way the light was changing, getting longer, with the way the city looked different in March than it did in winter, something in it reaching. Daniel called at 9 p.m. every night. She stopped being surprised by it and started being glad for it in the open, unguarded way. That means you've stopped protecting yourself from something and started letting it in. On Thursday night, he said, "Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that watching you do this has been—" He stopped, started again. "You changed something in me. I came into this thinking of my sister, and I stayed because of you. Just you." Zara was at her east window, morning coming in from the other side of the dark, the photograph on the shelf behind her, the city below doing its eternal, indifferent, beautiful thing. "Daniel," she said. "Yeah. Come over for coffee tomorrow, after." A pause, warm and full and carefully hopeful. "Yeah," he said. "Okay. Yeah." The ruling came Friday morning at 10 a.m. Judge Pierce found in favor of Zara Cole on all counts. The misconduct motion against Miriam was dismissed with prejudice. Pierce's language was precise and pointed. The presence of a family member, regardless of professional title, does not constitute judicial interference. To rule otherwise would punish a mother for appearing when called. Officer Dale Reeves was found to have violated use of force protocol, equal protection standards, and department conduct codes. Pierce referred the matter to the Civilian Oversight Board with a recommendation for termination. He also awarded damages, not symbolic, not nominal, but the kind of number that meant something. With the kind that said this happened and it was wrong, and we are saying so in a language everyone understands. Daniel sat very still beside her when the ruling was read. Then he turned to look at her, and Zara, who had held herself together through 27 days of hate mail and depositions and late-night phone calls, and a grief she'd been carrying for 7 years, and the particular exhaustion of having to fight for your own basic dignity in a mall on a Saturday morning, felt her eyes fill. She let them. She didn't blink it back. She didn't look at the ceiling. She let it come, because she had earned it, because some things deserved to be felt in full, because her father had always said that tears weren't weakness. They were the body's way of marking the things that mattered. Daniel reached under the table and took her hand, as she held on. In the gallery, Miriam Cole sat very still in her dark coat with her reading glasses in her hands and felt the ruling land in her chest like something coming home. She did not cry in public, hadn't in 30 years, not since her husband's funeral, not since she decided that public composure was the price of public power and paid it faithfully ever since. But her hands in her lap were shaking. Just slightly, just enough for someone who knew her to see. And she thought about a man who had driven his daughter to the library every Saturday and let her take out more books than she could carry and never once said a word about the weight of them. "We kept our hands on it," she told him. "Both of us. She's okay. She's more than okay." More the coffee was decaf because Daniel said he'd had enough adrenaline for one morning, and Zara laughed and made it anyway. They sat at her small kitchen table. Not the conference room, not the cafe, not the sidewalk or the courthouse, or any of the charged and complicated spaces where they'd been becoming something to each other over the past month. Just her kitchen, the east window, morning light coming in at the right angle. He told her more about his sister, about the way she'd slowly, over years, rebuilt her relationship with public spaces, about how she'd called him this morning, before the ruling, just to say she was thinking about him. Zara told him about her father's voice, how she could still hear it sometimes so clearly it didn't feel like memory. It felt like presence. "He would have liked you," she said. Ellen, she meant it simply and completely, and she let it be simple and complete. Daniel looked at her across the small kitchen table with his decaf coffee and his wire-rimmed glasses and the unguarded expression of a man who has stopped being careful about what he lets show on his face. "Tell me more about him," he said. So she did. She talked for a long time. The morning light moved across the kitchen floor the way it always did, slow and golden, marking the hours in a language older than words. The city hummed below. Somewhere outside, spring was making its case, tentatively, insistently, the way good things come back after hard winters. And Zara Cole, in her own kitchen, in her own life. When, with the marks long gone from her wrists and justice on the record, and her mother's thumbprints still warm in her memory, and a man across the table who had shown up and stayed, Zara Cole told her father's story to someone who wanted to hear it. And in the telling, something that had been heavy for a long time became, if not light, then bearable. Then more than bearable. Something close to whole.